Pete Calandra here. Today's video is the first in a series on scoring short films. When learning how to score films, quite a bit of emphasis is put on scoring feature-length films while not paying enough attention to the benefits of scoring short films. Most college courses, including my own, use scores from great composers and films as the basis for teaching film scoring, and a majority of these films are feature-length. The benefits of learning how to score short films are many. For example, one path to scoring films for an aspiring composer is to meet a young filmmaker putting together their first project, and it will most likely be a short film. This creates the opportunity to learn all the tools needed to score a feature-length project on the job and in a more condensed and easier to handle package. Scoring a 10-minute film with 5 or 6 minutes of music, while not an easy task, is less intensive than scoring a 90-minute film with 50 or 60 minutes of music. You also learn how to work with the director and others on the creative team to finish the project. On a professional level, there are many opportunities to score short films. I have, over the last 10 years or so, scored dozens of short films for Sesame Street, ESPN, the Kennedy Center Honors, and others. There are many shows that have interstitial short biopics in the main body of the shows. Think of the Olympics broadcasts, where there is a focus on the story of an athlete who overcame special hardships to win a spot representing their country. There's usually a short film accompanying that tells the story. Film and music are both temporal arts in that they each occur over time. As such, the length of time it takes to unfold the story has an effect on the way music fits into the piece. For example, if it takes 90 seconds for a dramatic scene to unfold, the music will have a certain pace it uses to get to the climax of the scene. If the same story occurs in 30 seconds, the dynamic of the music will have to change to fit the parameters of a shorter timeline, bringing the audience to the conclusion in 1/3 the time as the 90-second scene. If a complete story is told in 5 minutes, the pacing of that will be much different than one told in 90 minutes. There'll be less time to develop themes, and the music typically ends up having a similar structure as a short suite. Today's film score is from a sizzle reel I scored recently for a TV project in development. A sizzle reel is a short promotional video made especially for a television series or film. Since this project is still in development, I won't be able to play the visuals or the voiceover, but I will be able to in future videos for this series. That being said, what I can say about this film is that the story takes place in the Middle East with mystery, tension, strife, and ultimately an uplifting, positive conclusion. Let's see how that plays out in this 5-minute score. If you like this video, give a thumbs up. For more content, please subscribe, and to be notified, ring that bell. Please post any comments or questions below. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back after the playthrough to break the score down. Before we get started breaking down the music, it's important to set up your session properly so that it can read the film SMPTE-wise. And this is true in every DAW. So if we look down here where the film track is, of course, as I said before, I'm not going to be showing the film. It has a frame rate of 23.976 frames per second. So let's go up here to our setup and we go to session. And that in Pro Tools can also be accessed from Command 2. And I've got my time code rate here at 23.976 seconds set up so that the time code between Pro Tools and the film is the same. I've also given myself a little bit over 5 seconds pre-roll so that my first bar of music starts at bar 1. Before I start scoring the film, I watch the film several times. I get a good sense of the pacing, the visuals, any interesting effects that they've done, any sound design that they've put in, and I have a discussion with the filmmakers, and we create what's called spotting notes. Spotting notes are basically just a diary of the film, and it will allow you to set up your session with your time code, where your hits are, and where scenes change, where moods change. And then once I've got that together, I'll go into Pro Tools and I will set up my markers. So as you can see right here, I've got lots of markers in, and I set all these up before I start writing. I also refrain from putting any time signatures and tempo changes in at first. I just set up my markers. I set them up so that the time reference is absolute. So in other words, they're set up to the SMPTE time code, because if I change the tempo, what's bar 4 now, if I started at 72, bar 4 would start a little earlier because the tempo is quicker. This way, it keeps an absolute reference to the time code where all your markers are. The way I have this set up is much like I would have an orchestral score set up, except that in this particular piece, I've used some evolving live performance samples as opposed to just pure articulations to give some life, and I'll go through that in a minute. One benefit of scoring a short film is that you can do the entire film in one session. This is about a 5-minute piece here, so I've got just one session open and the whole film is scored in there. I don't have a big template. Templates are great. Some people use them, they swear by them. I like to set up a template for a project. And what I've done here is I have some solo instruments and a lot of group instruments. I had to turn this around really fast. I spent the morning setting up a template, and then I wrote for the afternoon, and then the next day I came back and finished it. So I have my click on the very top, and then I've got English horn, short winds, low winds, short, low brass, short, and then I've got a VCA that controls all of these. What I use a VCA for is, for example, the whole track is playing here. What are my winds and brass doing? I can just hit that. And then also a VCA is like a master volume control. So if I wanted to bring up that entire group of instruments, I can easily do that just by playing around with the volume here, or if I wanted to make them a little softer. Then I've got percussion right here. Just some clicky stuff, not heavy percussion in this piece. There are some explosions in the film. I wanted to make sure that the actual sound design had a lot of impact, so I stayed away from things that sounded like explosions in the percussion area. I could play some of these sounds. So here's the winds short. An ensemble patch, low winds short. These are all Spitfire patches. Low brass short. I've got my clicky-clacky percussion. I've got the noir piano. I have 2 instances of it. One is a felt piano. And I have one that's a pure piano. And I've got both of them going through 2 different reverbs. Plateau reverb, which is a preset on the Lexicon 224, which I think is really beautiful. I have multiple tracks of harp harmonics. Excuse me. These are all Spitfire harps, I believe. And this one is Près de la Table, I think that's what that's called. So that's very spiky. It's almost like playing by the bridge on an electric guitar. A regular harp. And then Besbiliando, which is a tremolo effect. And then I've got my VCA for the piano and the harp. Then I've got some vocal tracks. Got vocal performances. This is from Heaviosity. Works really well. And then there's a second one here. And then I've got 2 tracks of Eric Whitacre Choir here. And these were committed because they were starting to use up CPU power on my computer. The first patch in my strings is an ensemble patch, high strings, and it's from the Spitfire Audio Symphonic Evolutions. And that's the patch right there. And I've got that going through my FabFilter Pro R reverb. Let's take a listen to how this evolves. Having performance patches like this, where the sound unfolds over time to do things that you really can't program sequence-wise, is really a great thing to add into your more traditional template because it gives a lot of life and humanity to your otherwise programmed sequences. So below the high strings, we have some solo violin, which is also from Spitfire. It's the Virtuoso from the solo strings, total performance patch. And then there's a spiccato patch below that. Okay, this is from the studio strings. And it's a small ensemble, 4 players, which one thing I like about the studio strings. Cello, Colegno. That's from the Hans Zimmer strings. Okay, and then flautando strings, which is from the Spitfire chamber strings. Albion 1 spiccato. Albion 1 pizzicato. Chamber spiccato. Now this brings up a point. Let me move this up here. Why have 2 spiccatos? Well, this is a larger ensemble. This is a smaller ensemble. Changing colors, same articulation, different size ensemble gives you a different feel. And your choice to use which one depends upon the kind of emotional content you want in your piece. After that, we've got some solo strings. So from the Spitfire Alternative Solo Strings library, we've got Staccato Dig Violin 1, or just violin. Spiccato. Right, it's different. And then cello. A second cello. And then below that, all these reddish colored strings are all motion strings. This one is from Tundra. It's the Ricochet, Spitfire Tundra. Very nice. And then we've got a chamber grid. This is from Olaf Arnold, I believe. Let me turn up the volume on that. Again, gives you stuff that you can't really program, and this is an alternative chamber grid. Third one. Chamber waves. Tenuto swarm. And then Novo strings from Heaviosity. These are similar to what Spitfire does, just different. So I like these. They're a nice alternative to the Spitfire. And then we've got another swarm here. Woodwinds. And then below that, we have some audio tracks. So the Kepler ensemble from Spitfire, very CPU intensive. So I had to render them. So let's listen to the top one. And then with the cellos. And then over here, we've got some Ulst strings, which is from, I believe, Albion 4. And these are... Again, useful. You can't really program things like that and have them sound convincing. And then below that, I've got all my reverbs. Now, I'm not using the Eno Verb. I am using the Echo Boy, Plateau, and Pro R. So this is the Fab Filter Pro R, and that's how I've got it set up. Echo Boy is set up for an eighth note. And then this is the preset. I also have to turn the system noise off because it gets very noisy. I think I'd use it just the way it is. It sounds so good. And then this is my mastering chain, which is HEQ, just a little bit of mid-range. Brainworks. This is to make it a little bit wider and some compression. And then my mastering compressor. I didn't go crazy with my mastering chain. Now I've got all my music going through an aux track. And the reason I do that, if you look here, I'm mixing the entire track so that this is the dialogue right here. So the dialogue speaks out. And so I can do that all from one fader. So that's the basic way that I set up my session. Let's go through this a little bit and break down the composition. Here we go. So what I can tell you about this is that the opening establishing shot is of these sacred places in the Middle East. And it's sort of at twilight or sunrise. I couldn't tell which one it was, but it was definitely at an hour where the light was very haunting and you're seeing these really ancient structures. And I thought that something like this with choir and solo cello is also a very, very emotional sound with floating strings, which is what the ricochets are doing, would be really nice for the opening. And then right here where it says first frame, okay, that's where the action starts happening. All right, and we're getting past this establishing shot. So that low pulse is the acoustic piano. And that's the felt piano. You can hear it's very muted. And I do have that EQ'd a little bit. I've got some of the low end chopped off. And this is a favorite technique of mine here. I have this first three notes are solo, and then when we get to this note here, I accompany that with the choir. Oops, wrong one. Sorry. Accompany that with the choir here, and then also the chamber grid. So if I take it from here and just solo the choir and the chamber grid, there we go. Right, the aggregate sound of those two instruments really makes it very haunting. If I just had that by itself, that's okay, but once you add the second instrument, right, and it becomes an aggregate timbre, that's where your colors and your emotion really start to build up. So here, the film was cut a little irregularly, so I had to come up with a way to justify that. So the rhythm there is a little bit off. And at first it bothered me, but now I think I kind of really like it because it's not so regular and it sounds a little random. And then this is another technique that I like, is to pass around the orchestration. So I've had two solo violin lines, and now that gets answered by this solo cello. So cello. And right, instead of simply imitating what I've done here with the orchestration, I've used different combinations of sounds. So let's take a listen to that. So that's really nice. And then the piano changes there, and it's doubled by the harp. That's harp harmonics, I believe, right? So that's really nice. It adds a nice point, a nice little percussive point to the piano. And again, combinations of instruments. That's where your colors come in, because to just have the solo piano there, that's nice, but this is, the music changes here, right? We've been having this hypnotic drone with two notes, two pitches playing back and forth. And now this is the first time that there's any kind of faster rhythmic movement in the piece. And I emphasize that with a little, just an octave higher, a little, just a little. Now there are explosions happening here. So let me just unsolo the piano so we can hear everything. So I've got this rhythmic passage happening in the cello there, and I'm leaving a lot of space for the explosions to happen. The rhythm is being carried by this sort of irregular harp. Right? I didn't quantize that at all. It's a little bit jagged. And then I've got these little stabby strings here. But there's a lot of space in the mid-range for those explosions to live. And the benefit of that is they can turn your music up a little higher because it's not conflicting, or rather, it's not conflicting so much with the sound design. And that is an essential part of film composing, and you do have to look at that in advance and plan for that as you're composing. How's my music going to fit in with all the other elements? Continuing on. And now the tone changes and there's some dialogue about the aftermath of explosions and people being injured and property being destroyed, maybe people dying. And again, I've got a few measures of this descending bass line here. So the low note of those chords are descending, and then it changes right there. And notice those strings have very little vibrato on them, right? So there's not so much emotion there. It's sort of still, stark. And that's nice right here where you have the cello and the violin. The cello's just holding that note. It's a beautiful register for the cello. And we've got these chamber grid strings here. And again, changing, right? I don't let things linger for too long. I like to have almost like a kaleidoscope effect. In a short film, especially something that's a sizzle reel, this has to move along. And even though these are moody, almost ambient pieces right now, you want to have it feel like a roller coaster ride where you're sort of driving things along from one emotional peak to the next. And there's some valleys where it rests, and you want the dynamics to keep moving forward. So I'm constantly, every few measures, shifting the orchestration and the feel. And the swarm is really nice because that pulse there, again, it's not something you can program, but it adds almost like an unsettled character to something that's very melancholy. And again, the felt piano. And now we pick up with something in tempo. All right, let's take a look at that. Let's zoom in on these tracks. Albion 1 spiccato. And then the bass notes are pizzicato, just a different articulation. And notice they're not on the beat. The third one is, I'm not hitting the downbeat. Even though the spiccato strings are accenting that downbeat, the bass notes aren't. And to go along with that, we've got a nice harp. And our percussion there. It's almost like a ticking watch. Okay, and then here I changed to 7/8 time because there's a different section here. I have kids response, so that must mean that, if I remember correctly, that there's adults talking before, and then the kids are responding to what they've been saying, not directly to them, but they're telling their side of how they feel about the events that happened. So we go to 7-8, which again is a little bit unsettled. And I've got just these solo violins doing this pulsing thing. So they're, again, changing the size of the ensemble. I'm using all these different colors and ensemble sizes, much like I would if I was orchestrating this on a piece of paper for a live ensemble. And the spiccato. And the percussion is still moving. Just changing keys right there. And now we're coming up to 4/4. Okay, so what's different about this from the first time it comes in, or even when the ensemble is here, is that we have a big downbeat. Okay, and then this is also being punctuated here right now by some low winds and brass. And again, in the 7/8 section, going back a little bit, there were these winds, almost Steve Reich kind of flourishes. And transitional phrase. So I've got this broken up in the winds here with the upper winds. And then the piano is doing that, but with a little figure. You don't need to do that melodic figure in all the instruments. That starts to sound a little cheesy. So it's in strings and the piano, and then the woodwinds and the brass are just doing the accent. And then the spiccato and the pizzicato here are just emphasizing our low notes. Okay, so we're now into this coexistence area, and this is the beauty of these Evo patches. The chamber grid is that these sounds evolve, and you can just play very few notes and have it still be an interesting texture. And again, another up-tempo bit, something in 3, or triplets. And the descending bass line in there, I did something with sustained chords and the descending bass line earlier, so this sort of relates back to that a little bit. Right, notice I'm only using strings there. I'm changing the bass line here, adding an answering phrase in the winds. I built up that section by layering different articulations in as the piece unfolded. That little answering phrase in the wings. Bass is moving a different direction from the very beginning. Now the violins come in. Harmony ends the section, leading us into the next bit. And this is very similar idea as the very opening of the piece. Just reorchestrated a little differently. And now that's those beautiful ulst strings. That adds really a lot of tension there, coming out of nowhere seemingly. So you've got this melancholic music, but there's something not good happening. Little silence, and then the tone change. And now for this, I've changed the timbre of the piano. I've gone from this right to a pure piano. So that comes in here. Simple choir and flautando strings, just adding a nice texture in the background, holding out long notes. Just simple notes in the choir and strings, just to add some texture, and an ascending piano figure with the cleaner piano sound. Emotional solo cello. Again, an ascending figure. And you see how, I'm going to play that again, but I want you to take a listen to how my orchestration grows as it's unfolding. The piano staying the same, and then I'm layering different timbres in, starting off with just simple notes, then having an emotional cello, and then thicker chords played with a different sound, which is this swarm right here. So let's take a listen to that again. Simple. Just a little more uplifting. A little more hopeful. Drop the piano down an octave, and now the cello. Bring in the different lower harmonies. And that leads us to this. This is, you could think of as an introduction to this next bit. And this moves faster with rhythms in the piano. And the harp comes in, and then we've brought this vocal in. And the vocal really adds a lot of emotion. So again, getting some of these performance patches into your static sample recreations or your mock-ups, or in this case, this was the final, will really add a lot of emotion and color and depth that you can't really program in with static samples. Let's take a listen again from here. Even though that music is hopeful, there was still an air of melancholy and sadness there because you still don't know the outcome of what's going to happen. It's to be determined in the future. The reality of the present time is still a little bit sad, but at this point in the film, you do start to see some signs of a hopeful resolution to the issue. That's the end of this tutorial. Again, as I said in the beginning, feel free to leave any questions or comments below. Like, subscribe, share, ring that bell, all the YouTube stuff. I'm going to play the whole bit out from the beginning again. I appreciate you watching. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. I'm Pete Calandra, and I'll catch you on the next one.